it's become quite clear to me that Game Week 4 is a really popular time for FPL managers to be using their first wildcards. I'll admit I've made a couple of videos on this topic already, but as a result of that, I've managed to narrow it down to my 3 favourite drafts going into Game Week 4. And what I've done with my teams is I've made 3, each with different team values. So no matter what position you're in terms of budget, you should be able to find a draft that's valuable to you. All right, first up, I've got a draft with a 100.1 million team cost, 71.3 expected points in Game Week 4 if you captain Erling Haaland, and a 95% AI rating, according to the Fantasy Football Hub AI draft rating. If you want to sign up for Fantasy Football Hub, play around with your own wildcard drafts, get an expected points figure for each player for the next 3 game weeks, an AI rating of your team. I get 50% off Fantasy Football Hub. You can sign up in the link in the description below. So this draft then, 100.1 million team value, Dean Henderson in goal. Now, there are other options around this price point for goalkeepers, but I'm quite bullish that I still think Dean Henderson is the best 4.5 million goalkeeper. Ultimately, your opinion might be different on that. And I've got to say, the top 4.5 million goalkeepers, I'm thinking Sells, Johnson of Wolves, Muric of Ipswich, those kind of players, Verbruggen of Brighton. There's much of a muchness in it. So if you want to pick a different one at this price category in goal, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to get annoyed at all really. But for me, Dean Henderson is my preference in goal. Trent Alexander-Arnold, Rico Lewis and Robinson in defence. Trent just looks to be the best defender in the game right now. And if you have the cash to get him, I think you should. He's so good from an attacking perspective. Liverpool haven't conceded a goal yet this season. That's all you need to know, right? I think Trent is looking like a really good option. Rico Lewis, I'll admit, comes with a bit of risk. Post the international break, there will be question marks as to whether he plays for Man City week on week going forward. With Kyle Walker in the fray, you'd have to ask the question. But I do still think at 4.7 million for a potential starting Man City fullback, and he is the one at the moment, the Man City fullback that's looking the most attacking. He's kind of playing that inverted attacking fullback, whereas Guardiola on the left-hand side is the one sitting back. And most of the time, Rico Lewis looks to be basically as advanced as Erling Haaland. All of those attributes put together at 4.7 million, I think he provides great value. And as you can see with this team, you could maybe go for Greaves instead of Johnson as your 4 million defender if you wanted to. But there will always be 2 other defenders that could sub in for him if there is a risk that Lewis doesn't play on a particular week, particularly for Game Week 5, right, when he's got Arsenal at home, maybe even Game Week 6 Newcastle, where you might be able to change him about. Anthony Robinson, I think, is one of my favourite other defenders at this kind of price category, up to 4.6 million now. Been doing really well from an attacking perspective. Got West Ham at home in Game Week 4. I think that's a really nice fixture. I think that's a pretty solid back 4. Mo Salah, Eze, Rodgers and Mbeumo in midfield with this one. Honestly, I think this is probably the best 4 midfielders in the game. Not necessary, though, for Game Week 4. The one reason I say that is because Mbeumo has Man City away. You can see there I've got Smith Rowe on the bench, who I think is one of the outstanding assets at that price, particularly with the fixtures he's got coming up. Compare him, for example, with Semenyo, who I think is another really good option at that price. I'd actually say Smith Rowe is slightly better, just considering the fixtures that he's got. Semenyo's got, I believe, Chelsea and Liverpool in the next 2, whereas Smith Rowe's got West Ham and Newcastle both at home. And I would say Fulham could quite easily score in both of those games. Obviously, Mo Salah goes without saying how good he has been this season. And for Game Week 5 with Bournemouth at home, I would say he's probably the best captain because in comparison, you've got Haaland with Arsenal at home. And I just think having both of these players is great for points. And it means that you just have the best captain week on week. I really, really like Eze. On penalties, free kicks, starts every game. Just Crystal Palace's absolute talisman for 6.9 million as it is currently. I think he's brilliant. Morgan Rodgers hasn't yet got an attacking return for Aston Villa, but he showed all the attributes of a really, really good player. And with Villa being in the Champions League, you would ask, what do his minutes look like in the future? But I think with Smith Rowe, Konsa and a starting 4 million defender, maybe Greaves, for example, or Johnson on your bench, there's always someone to come in for him. And then Brian and Mbeumo, for the same reasons as Eze, really. Without Tony in the team, he just becomes Brentford's absolute talisman. On the pitch for 90 minutes every game, penalties, free kicks. Unfortunately, does have Man City in Game Week 4, which is a little bit of a put-off. Again, you could start Smith Rowe over him if you wanted to. And then in game week 5, he's got Tottenham, West Ham in game week 6, and then from game week 6 onwards, the fixtures for Brentford are just insane. So I really like him as an option. Haaland, Isak, and João Pedro up front. Haaland obviously proven to be the best player in the game right now, in my opinion. Isak scored a goal in game week 3. I think he's going to come good. You know, all the attributes are there. He's got a historic record of scoring multiple Premier League goals across multiple seasons. I just think he's great. And he's on penalties for Newcastle. Had a really good international break, scoring goals for Sweden. I think he's coming back on form and ready to go. Wolves and Fulham in his next 2. I'd back him to score in those games. And João Pedro has definitely gotten off to a great start this season. 5.7 million is great value for the level of returns he's put up. He, of course, does present a bit of a minutes risk in my mind. However, you know, he's in the team at the moment, playing for them. Hasn't played for Brazil yet either, which is important. He's got to travel home, but he hasn't gotten any minutes for Brazil, I believe. Ipswich, Forest, and Chelsea away in his next 3. He could score in all 3 of those games, right? And he's on penalties for Brighton. Other than that, the bench, like I said, Fabianski in goal at 4 million. He's probably going to play over Areola, maybe for 1 or 2 game weeks. Does look like Areola picked up an injury against Man City. Spoken about Smith Rowe. Konsa, there or thereabouts, the best 4.5 million defender or defender of that price category outside of Lewis and Robertson. Potentially, you could go for Lewis Dunk as well. And then I've got Ben Johnson in here of Ipswich, but I do think Greaves as Ipswich as well is a perfectly decent 4 million defender. I mean, take your pick at that price, but yeah, this is the first wildcard draft. The next team is a slight variation on the one you've just seen and is a little bit more expensive at 100.2 million in terms of total team cost. If you did want to bring this team cost down, I think quite easily you could drop Rico Lewis for Lewis Dunk, something like that, and then you'd free up 0.2 and get down to the magic 100 million. So I'm not going to go through the whole team because the structure of it is relatively the same as the previous one, but a couple of players of difference. And I'm very sorry to anyone watching this channel. I really like Andy Robertson as an option. I think he offers very similar upside to Trent. Probably not quite as much from an attacking perspective, but he's a whole million less. And that million allows you basically to get Cole Palmer in your team. And I think Cole Palmer just looks absolutely amazing, doesn't he? He's, well, nominated for the Ballon d'Or, right? 10.6 million. He's obviously a lot more expensive this season, but he's just Chelsea's absolute talisman, right? And Chelsea, right? Yes, they might be questionable in terms of the amount of players they have in their team, maybe a bit questionable defensively as well, but they have gotten off to a good start in terms of this season, in terms of scoring goals. He is currently red flagged as well, as you can see in the Fantasy Football Hub tool. That might be red or amber. You have to bear with, I'm colourblind, so I struggle to tell the difference between those colours. But he has been pictured in Chelsea training, so for me, he's going to play in Game Week 4. And maybe those expected points totals are slightly impacted by his current injury. I would expect that number for Bournemouth to be in and around 7 or 8 expected points if he wasn't an injury doubt. So yeah, by dropping Trent to Robertson, you can get Palmer in by dropping again Mbeumo out and getting Wissa in as a backup striker. You can see there. This is the kind of team you can build if you want to get Salah, Palmer and Haaland all in. And I think genuinely this team is really well balanced because, again, if you have a third 4 million defender in there, you know, week on week, you might not want to play João Pedro every week. He could get benched. Same with Rico Lewis, same with Rogers, same with Smith Rowe. You've got 3 bench options here with this team in Wissa, Konsa and Greaves, Johnson, whoever you want to pick as your 4 million defender to play around with. And I really like Wissa as an option. I'm not going to speak about him too much because I've spoken about him enough on this channel. From open play, he is actually more dangerous than Brian Mbeumo, and I just like his minute security. And again, going back to what I said about Mbeumo, Brentford's fixtures from game week 5 onwards, even that Tottenham away fixture in 5 you could class to be good, I think are really, really fantastic. In fact, I would say Brentford have probably the best fixture run right now until sort of game week 11, game week 12 time. So yeah, this team is really good. Like I said, 100.2 million in terms of team cost, so a little bit expensive. Might be quite hard for some of you watching this to buy it, but I think there are some really simple ways you can save a bit of cash. Maybe downgrading Henderson to Sam Johnston of Wolves, that saves you 0.1 million. Rico Lewis down to a 4.5 defender, saves you 0.2. You know, other ways to make, likewise Robinson could go down to someone cheaper as well. But the core structure of this team remains, I think, 70.4 expected points if you captain Haaland and a 93% AI rating. And this third and final draft I put together is just for those that are struggling, I would say, a little bit in terms of budget. So this team has a 99.5 million team cost. I know there have been various victims in this game of price falls. So if you're one of those, hopefully this team is affordable to you and still, in my mind, looks pretty good. So same sort of defensive structure we've seen previously. Henderson, Trent, Lewis, Robinson in defence. Like I said, I think that's the strongest sort of starting back four you can go for. a midfield of Salah, Eze, Mbeumo, Rodgers and Smith Rowe, sort of the core five that have kind of made up most of the team, well, the other two drafts with the exception of Mbeumo. Unfortunately, with this team, you kind of really do have to start one of your Brentford players for the Man City fixture, which you might not like. But, you know, it's what you got to do with that limited budget. And I've got to say, honestly, do you think Brentford have a reasonable chance of scoring against Man City? They've beaten Man City at the Etihad in seasons gone by, right? I think they could quite easily put a goal past them. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. Rodgers, Smith Rowe, I think two of the best midfielders around this price category. Haaland, and then instead of Isak, I've gone for Solanke because I like the fact that he's $1 million cheaper and he does appear to be fit and ready to go for game week 4. And I just like the thought of picking a good player that's of low ownership when you're on your wild card. It's not like Solanke is a super risky differential, right? He's a proven Premier League goal scorer and he's now playing for a better team than he was previously when he scored. I think he scored 19 goals for Bournemouth last season. And this season he's going to be doing that for Spurs, who I think will create a lot more chances and give him a good chance of scoring goals. Now he does have Arsenal at home in game week 4, I'll admit, but Arsenal are without Declan Rice and Martin Odegaard now. Tottenham, I would say, have a chance of scoring against pretty much anyone. Do I think they'll win the game? Probably not. But do I think Arsenal keep a clean sheet? Also probably not. And if Arsenal don't keep a clean sheet, you got to think Solanke has a good chance of being involved in those goals. You know, he's cheaper than Isak, hence why you can build this team with the budget available. I just really like him as an option. And the fact that he is just a tried and trusted, proven Premier League goal scorer who is also a differential, I just like the thought of picking a player of that kind of style if you're on your wild card. And then on the bench, I've got Fabianski, Wissa. Again, I'm not going to talk through Wissa in all that detail because I don't need to. I've spoken about him a lot in my previous videos. I like the option of having Wissa as kind of that, what do you call it? That'd be the 8th sort of attacker. Purely because his minutes are safer than João Pedro. And you can just always count on him, unless he gets injured, you can just always count on him to start. So, for example, if one of your players in your team outside of that gets injured, again, like Solanke misses a couple of weeks, or Rodgers gets rotated for Champions League, etc., Wissa can just come in and you know he's going to play. I'd actually say you do have a bit of a benching headache in game week 5, deciding who to bench for Wissa, because I do think I would start Wissa against Tottenham. So this team, like I said, 99.5 million. So if you've lost a bit of team value, just been unlucky basically on players you've started with and they've dropped in value, this team should be affordable for pretty much anyone. And again, if you somehow have less than 99.5 million in the bank, like I've said in previous drafts, there are easy ways you can drop value in this team. So Trent to Robertson, you probably don't need to do any more than that. Lewis to maybe Lewis Dunk instead. Robinson could go down to another 4.5 million defender if you wanted to. This team is predicted to get 66.8 expected points, so slightly less than the other drafts we've shown, but that's of course because it's $1 million cheaper, right? If you spent the extra $1 million on upgrading some of these players elsewhere, then that would work out for you. I also think just with his current fitness status, Solanke's expected points, particularly for game week 4, are impacted by that. So you can see there, he's got 2.3 predicted points against Arsenal, whereas Wissa's on 4.2. So if you play the expected points algorithm, you'd actually start Wissa in this and score 2 extra expected points. So being at around, what's that? Yeah, 68.7 I think you'd be on if you started Wissa instead. That's bearing in mind you're captaining Haaland here. But I just believe that Solanke is a better player than Wissa, and Arsenal at home without Rice and Odegaard is a slightly better fixture than Man City away, if that makes sense. And I also think Spurs are a better team from an attacking perspective than Brentford. So with all those things in mind, providing he is fit, that's the big if, right? Is Solanke fit? I do think I would probably start Solanke over Wissa. But again, we'll get the press conferences throughout the week and make a decision from there. But yeah, if you've lost a bit of team value and you're on your wild card, I think this draft will do you really well. All right, and that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that. 3 wildcard drafts there that hopefully will, well, hopefully one of them speaks to you in terms of a team you want to pick. I've gone for one that's relatively template, another one with Cole Palmer in, and another one that's a little bit cheaper if you've unfortunately lost a bit of team value since the start of the season. So if you enjoyed the video, please leave me a like rating. I also just want to say, due to the international break and not much changing with things, I made an updated transfer plans video yesterday, and I've made the video all basically from scratch, reusing some graphics. But what I didn't really realize is that it's similar to a lot of what I've spoken about in previous videos. So, you know, I wasn't trying to like grift content or anything. I just wanted to make a video with my kind of updated thoughts, given it was a week since I'd made that original one. So my plans had changed slightly. But ultimately, I realized it wasn't all that different from my other videos. So I just want to say I apologize for that. I appreciate the feedback you guys gave me on that one. Hopefully this video was helpful. There's some new stuff in here that I haven't spoken about before. All these drafts I've literally made this morning and propped together in graphics, etc. And I thought the idea of having 3 teams of kind of differing budgets was useful as well, because yes, I could show you the best optimized, best, wildcard draft for expected points, etc. But that might not be affordable for everyone. So I wanted to make a video that's kind of, what word am I looking for? Inclusive. So any kind of budgetary requirements, etc. you have, this video sort of caters for it. So yeah, I don't think there's anything more to say. Let me know in the comments, what you think of those drafts. If there's anything you change, and you can subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just there on your screen. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in my next video.